I welcome you all to the BIM Africa webinar, which partnership with Plannerly. We have Clive Jordan here. So thank you all for joining. I'll hand over now to Clive. Then he will take you all through BIM with regards to Plannerly, then an introduction to planning as well as a demonstration. Then you can come in with your questions and answers. So Clive, we begin.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invite to be part of this and share more with the students around the world, but specifically in Africa. Today, we're in for a bit of a special treat because the program that we're going to go through is a masterclass that is usually a 4-week program, but we're going to cram it into about 40 minutes. So wish me luck. Let's see how we go. So the agenda, first of all, we'll have a bit of an introduction about BIM and BIM execution planning. And then we'll talk you through 4 areas that are really important for BIM, building information modeling. And they are related to how you create the plan, how you create and agree on a scope, how you manage tasks to understand completion, and then how you verify that the objects and the elements and the information and the geometry and the data is all accurate and you can then use it. So a lot to cover. Our trademark, our motto is Smart Lean BIM. And this is doing the right BIM at the right time, by the right people, for the right reasons. And this is incredibly important because when we look at building information modeling, a 3D model can be created and used for so many different things. It can be from marketing and winning a project. It could be for analyzing and understanding the building as you go through designing and building, or it actually could be in operations and use afterwards. So there's so many uses. And that causes us a challenge. That's a real problem for us in our industry because each person at each point in time throughout the project will need a different amount of BIM and a different amount of whether it's geometry or data, information about something. And those differences in opinion can be really challenging and can cause a lot of miscommunication and a lot of impact on the cost. So we looked at all of the different tools that we use in the BIM ecosystem. And we understand that we've got some fantastic tools to do the authoring, the creation, the analysis, and then the use of a model. But for planning, we have been using disconnected tools that have not been designed for our industry. And they're not just disconnected from each other, but they're also disconnected from the rest of the workflow. And so we saw this as being a real opportunity. And as the world moves to become more digital and more efficient, we have seen the ability to take these tools and put them into a single cloud-based solution to make the whole of BIM execution planning much more simple. And the challenges that Plannerly, not planning late, but planning early, plan early, solves, and these are some of them that I'll take you through today, are about making it quicker to create the plans that are required, making it actually easier to manage between lots of different standards, making sure that people know what they're responsible for, and making sure that there's less waste in projects. So it's quite a lot to challenge ourselves with and deliver in such a short space of time, but this is where the masterclass comes in. So if you're ready to get started, I hope that I'm ready to get started too. Let's take a look. So the agenda will be 4 parts: the creation of a BIM execution plan first, then agreeing on a scope, then managing those tasks and verifying that we have met those agreements. They are the 4 parts. Let's take a look at BIM execution planning. In every project, we talked about that confusion and miscommunication, and everyone has a different idea of what the outcome should be sometimes. And this example really kind of in a funny way describes how the customer might explain the solution that they're looking for. The BIM team may have had one thought in their mind, but actually what ended up happening was that the customer really only wanted what we see on the right-hand side. And that miscommunication throughout is what we try to eliminate in planning. And having a BIM execution plan allows us to do that. We've seen them become more and more mandatory. They are actually now a plan that is dictated as being mandatory by governments in some countries now as well. So they're becoming more and more essential for every team around the world to create one for every project. But even if you create one, we see that a lot of them are unsuccessful. And why might that be? They're unsuccessful because they take a long time to create. They're unsuccessful because they end up in somebody's email and they don't get read and understood. And then also because they're agreements across different companies, this is a real challenge by sending a multi-party agreement to single parties for agreement when there should be a lot of communication around that. So these are some of the challenges. And unfortunately, when we create a BIM execution plan, sometimes it ends up in the bottom drawer gathering cobwebs. And unfortunately, it only gets taken out of the drawer when there's a problem. Now, we want to have a successful BIM execution planning process. So how do you do that? Well, one of the first tips is collaboration. So everyone on the team invited to the same place to collaborate on the BIM execution plan. Then having all of those team members actually help create it as a document is incredibly important as well. It increases their buy-in to the document. Then we want to have some engaging content. So not just all boring text and tables, but why not include videos and images? Why not embed flowcharts and iframes into the content so that we can really understand and we want to engage in that content? And then having a multi-party agreement, we need to have commenting threads. So it's not just a static document that gets passed on an email. We need to have some way of commenting. We also need some way of controlling and slowly publishing the content and also being able to archive it at the end of that process. So let's take a look at what that might look like in practice. I'm going to jump into the software and we're going to have a quick demo of some simple BIM execution planning to start with. So what we see here is a set of projects. And if we enter one project here, we can see the team and some details about the project. But we're going to go into the Plan tab. And this is where we would define all of the processes and standards that are required on the project. It's not easy to get started when you don't have anything to get started with. So we're going to use some templates to get started quickly. And just on the left-hand side, I can start to see all of these different templates that are available to us and in lots of different languages as well. And we can simply just drag from the left-hand side and drop them into our project to get started. So if we want a mission statement to get started, and then maybe, I know that actually this one here, the BIM Basics, has got a nice video inside of it as well. So here you can see rich content that will really keep teams engaged. And maybe we want to search for a coordination process. So let's look for coordination and how do we go through project coordination? Let's drag one of those in as well. And each one of these is a section of content that can then be edited, but we also really like to group them in relevant categories. So being able to create a new category, and then maybe we would like some contract clauses, for example. And we can see all of our contract delivery strategy. Maybe there's some contract terms, and maybe we would like to have a signature block at the bottom. So all of those quickly created to generate us our starting point. I mentioned about collaboration and teams being able to create the content in a collaborative fashion. Well, every single team can come in and edit this at the same time, and all of the changes are saved to the cloud. And teams then also have the ability to comment and interact so you can get to an agreement and then start publishing the content. So when you're happy with something, so let's roll that up and then let's say that we agree on the mission statement. We think this is a good mission statement, so we're going to change this to be published. And now that will be available for a lot of other people in the team as well. So very quickly, we have captured from templates all of our detailed requirements from a process perspective and an understanding of the contract terms perspective. And now if we wanted to, we could go to the docs on the top right-hand side and we can create a new document with a cover page, headers and footers, let's add the info, the team, and then the plan, which is the plan that we were working on just here. And if I call this our BIM execution plan, or BEP for short, it will then gather up all of those pieces and generate us a document. And that document is a PDF that we could share either as a link, or we could share the document with team members if we wanted to download it. So it's got a nice cover page, it's got a project data page, it's got all of the team members, it's got our categories that we created with the contents, and then you can see also all of this really nicely formatted, links out to videos, very, very quick and simple to create. So that's the first one that we were talking about there, was creating a BIM execution plan. Incredibly important because we need to be able to collaborate with teams online. We need to be able to gather everyone's comments as we go through building this collaborative plan. And we need an approval process that we can then gather the approved pieces and put them into a contract that can be archived as we go through the project. So that's the first one, is how can we create a BIM execution plan very, very quickly, very collaboratively, and very, very beautifully, I would say, as well. The second one that we're going to cover is how to agree on the right BIM scope that teams can use to generate good BIM content and a lean workflow later on. Let's take a look at how we agree on a clear BIM scope. So we saw before how lots of people have lots of different opinions on what BIM should be for that project. The architect might want to create a certain set of model content, and then maybe the contractor needs a different, more detailed model for coordination or for quantity takeoff. And that disagreement can be really challenging when we're trying to work with one model right the way through the workflow. Why is it a challenge? Well, it's a challenge because when we have lots of different companies that are creating 3D models on their own, nobody's really sure about whether it should be the architect's responsibility to model the floor or whether it should be the structural team's responsibility to model the floor. Actually, on one project that I worked on, we had the best model content for the structure coming from the mechanical contractor of all things. So there was an architect's structural model, a structural team structural model, and a mechanical team structural model. And the mechanical one was the best one. That was the one that we all used in the end. The challenge in agreeing is because we use complex spreadsheets, and that really creates more confusion than understanding and clarity on projects. So trying to make it simple is really, really powerful and much more likely that you're going to get what you need. And then a lot of teams end up modeling the same thing. I mentioned that structural example where you get duplicate scope. And if nobody knows what they're supposed to model, sometimes you're going to get mixed scope as well. So to scope a project, let's look at how to do that. Let's see some tips on how to agree on a clear BIM scope. Well, the first thing is to ask the basic questions. The questions which are, why are we doing BIM in the first place? Very, very important. What scope is required for the use? So understanding what the model is going to be used for and understanding what you need from a content perspective. How much, so how developed does that content need to be? When does that content need to be provided? Who is responsible for providing the content? And then where do we start? Where do we start in all of this? Where do we start? What's important for the team to see and understand us starting? So defining the why, the first thing, and we see this in very simple forms as a column by column for each use, each purpose of the 3D model. And being able to then list the items down the left-hand side of what the scope is that we need, and then understanding in this grid what elements are required and how much is required for each one of those milestones. And even detailed into each cell is how much from a geometry perspective or from an information perspective. And then who is responsible? Here we can see the structural, mechanical, and plumbing team. They are responsible for certain scopes. And we can also see where that scope is handed over from the architect to the structural team. So understanding who is responsible at what point in time, and especially so when there are handovers between teams that are working on content. So we need to know what the BIM use is, we need to know what the scope is, we need to know who is responsible, and we need to know clearly what the detail is required, what the elements are required, what the information is required, etc. So let's take a look at scoping. How do we create a visual project scope that a lot of people, not just the BIM team, can understand? Let's take a look. So the second module here is the scope. We're going to jump into the scope module, and we're going to cheat a little bit by using templates on the left-hand side. And the templates jump out, and we can then search for what the content is that we like. So we've got a long list of content, but if we look for stairs, if I can spell stairs, so stairs as an example, are they metal stairs, wood stairs, etc.? Well, on this project, we're going to have some concrete stairs, and I can drag them from the library into the project and get started. And then for our use, our model use, we can, for milestone 1, we can define that as being anything we like, whether it's a model that's going to be used for quantity takeoff, a model that's going to be used for coordination, lots of different really, really powerful uses. And then we can decide which pieces of the model we need for that purpose. So if I add something, you can see Maybe we need the stairs, maybe we need the railings, and maybe we need it not in 2D, but maybe we need it in 3D. And maybe we do also want to add the landings. And you can see here, as we're adding these pieces, they are getting added to the top. So we can understand who is, see what is the requirement of the content for this purpose, for this milestone. And then as we dig in deeper, let's open this, and then we can start to say, assign a team. Maybe we want to assign a team for this. And in this example, we're going to say that it's the structural engineer that's responsible. And for the concrete stairs specifically, we're going to add some checklist items. And this one's going to say, just check that the stairs connect with the floors. We can add notes and attachments and a whole bunch of other things. And that really is the package of information for this requirement. You can see now that the checklist item comes on. But we don't want to do this every time for every single project. So we want to actually leverage what we've done before. So when we're scoping a project, we can go into our templates or our previous projects. I can open a template project. Oh, if I cancel this out first, because it was searching for something in that project. So I can open a template project here. It's an example project. And I can say, actually, I want to bring in the whole of the plumbing scope. And that will bring in, based on my settings. So I actually said, I want to bring in all milestones, all of those BIM uses, and all of the detail that I've previously scoped. And now we can see, if we open up the plumbing scope, this has brought in all of those requirements for us. So really quickly, really powerfully, we have brought in previous requirements. Maybe that's actually the plumbing team that has developed their scope for each of these model uses. And now we've got that very detailed scope with even the responsibility for information requirements at the handover milestone for the contractor in this case, for certain milestones, for certain pieces of information. So that is scoping. That's how we are able, in a collaborative way, to be able to agree on a scope that is suited for a BIM use, a purpose. We understand who is responsible for, what they are responsible for, when there's a handoff between one team and another team, and be able to make that really clear, not just from a set of maybe numbers or text, but from the visually rich images as well. Really, really powerful seeing those images. Number 3, once we have got a plan in place, once we've got a clear scope that everyone can understand, we've got a set of tasks that then need to be managed. So the next one, number 3, is how do we go about managing those tasks to completion? Let's ask ourselves why. Why would we need to manage the tasks? What's important about the management of tasks? Well, the first one is sequence. If we see on the left-hand side, we can see poorly prioritized, and it will cost us more money to route the pipe around the cable tray with more bends and more welds and more supports, versus on the right-hand side, if we have the correct priority structure, it will make it a lot cheaper and a lot quicker. So why is this a challenge? This should be obvious that we should be able to do this and sequence those events. But again, we're working with isolated teams, and it's really easy to model something out of sequence. Unlike in the built world, in the virtual world, I can model something and I can put it inside of the foundation, the pipe inside of the foundation. And then we're trying to combat this with some lean concepts, but some of these concepts are quite new for some teams. So trying to collaborate more is usually a challenge. So a few tips. Let's take a look at how we can sequence teams and tasks in a lot more clear and simple way. The first one is the big picture of having a priority structure, being able to fix things in place that are foundational, that are more costly to change later, that are less flexible, and fix those first and make the pyramid, the bottom of the pyramid, really solid with things that just can't change. And then moving all the way through things that are slightly more flexible, piping, but maybe the gravity systems need to be in place because they need a slope on the gravity systems. And then less and less impact on the things that are maybe under pressure and can route around others and have a lower cost to do that. Understanding that priority structure from big picture can be really efficient in building a sequence. And then what we see on the right-hand side is a set of sticky notes, which is helping teams to sequence the events before they go and waste their time in creating a model. So really powerful having a priority structure, and then being able to capture that in the digital board and sequence those tasks and keep it really visual and assign it to team members. And that way, what we have is a set of teams that start on the optimum date rather than all starting at the same time, and then being able to really have the teams start and finish work rather than start, finish, and then have to repeat the work and have rework because they've got too many people working in the same place. And not same place physically, but same place virtually in the 3D model. So let's take a look at how we would do that, how we would sequence those tasks that we've just created. Let's take a look at the timeline. So the next button, the next module over from the scope is the schedule. And if we take a look at the schedule, we can see that it's a task timeline. And the task that we have filtered for our first milestone, we can see is this concrete stairs task. And if we drag it into our project, we can see that this is, we're going to say it's a 19-day task. We can pick start and end dates if we wanted to. And we can also detail the schedule based on the schedule program, based on the detailed tasks that we are monitoring. So here it's one task, but if we wanted to split this into all of the pieces that we've just scoped out, and then we can maybe understand that the stairs will actually be first, maybe the landings, and then maybe the railings will happen afterwards. Maybe the landings are shorter, that will happen at the end. And maybe these actually have to happen before these, for example. So we can start to position these and have dependencies between tasks. Really making it a specific sequence and a specific duration so that other teams on other tasks can understand when they can sequence their work. It enables you to have less rework, people doing things for the right reasons at the right time. Really needs to have a scope and have a time component to it. So that's the scheduling. And actually, we should also mention that we can assign these to specific people. So here, I'm actually going to assign this to myself. And I can see that task that was in the checklist from the scope. So now that task is assigned to me. We can even bring more team members in here as well, so we can get into the detail on the task being assigned, on the task assignment. So to recap, being able to enhance the sequence so that people know when to model and start their work at the right time really reduces the rework. And then when we look at managing those tasks and trying to gather status reports for all of those tasks, it's a real challenge. So when Dilbert comes in with this, when will I get your project status report? That's the boss asking. And you're asking for a status report on the status report of the status report. And it's very time consuming for teams to always keep providing updates for people. So this challenge comes about because everyone has their own list of things that they need to do. They also usually have one person that's responsible for gathering up all of the status updates from everyone. It's like herding cats. And then it's always difficult to know whether the actual progress is linked to the original scope in the right way and whether it's actually accurate or not. So let's take a look at a couple of tips for managing that process. The first one that we have is being able to use a Kanban board. So being able to understand what the status is of the task based on the column that it's in, and then being able to drag and drop those cards, be able to update the progress. And in that simple way, you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got team members managing their own tasks. And on the right-hand side of the screen, we have a project manager that would have all of the tasks for the whole project and be able to see the whole project as an overview. So Michelle manages her tasks on the left. As she makes updates, then Ted can see those updates on his unfiltered view. And then let's dig a little deeper into the software. So managing tasks is usually a challenge, but if everyone manages their own tasks and we keep it really simple, that could make a big difference. So let's move on from the schedule to the track page. And the track page has those statuses, those columns, which are also color-coded based on, and you'll see those colors come up later, based on a pick list. So I'm going to filter just my tasks. And then I'm going to say, when I have started this task, I can just simply drag it from to do into started. And that can set up notification to make sure that people are aware that that started. And then when I have worked on it and I check off that I have done this, I've made sure that this item is checked off, then I can drag it and say, this task is now ready for review. Really simple, really clear, all by milestone. So all of those other activities would be in here as well. So if I was to show all of the others, we've got coordination milestones, etc. So let me put that filter back on. Okay, so we've just said that our task is ready for review. And when it's ready for review, it means that I don't have to check off a to-do list and then send an email to tell somebody. It's in the contract, it's in the requirements, and as soon as I drag and drop it, it updates to notify the manager on that project. Using a Kanban board is super simple, makes it really easy, and it makes it less hassle to share those updates. Okay, so we've been talking about building an execution plan, making that super quick and easy, making a clear scope that's visual, that everyone can understand, managing those tasks as you go and not having them separate in another setup that's very difficult to collect and to manage. And then the last one, we want to make sure that everyone has completed the requirements and we can verify that the requirements are met. This is incredibly important because if you have one bad model, one bad building information model, much like one bad apple in the fruit bowl, it can cause a big effect on the others. Why is it a challenge? Why is verifying difficult? Well, lots of people have different opinions, and in this example where one person thinks that it's a 6 and the other thinks that it's a 9, sometimes those requirements can be unclear, so we need to make sure that they are clear. Sometimes disconnected tools can be really difficult to have an understanding of what was promised and then what was actually delivered. And then being able to allocate the risk so that every piece of the scope is allocated to a specific party is usually very difficult. So let's take a look at some tips. How do we have a better, more compliant BIM workflow? The first part is to consolidate all of the requirements into one place. So we need to know who is responsible, when it's due, what the status is, what the milestone is. We need to know what the parts of that workflow that were included in that scope were. We need to have attachments, maybe submittals, reference documents. We need to have notes, maybe from meetings that we've been in. And we also need to have lists of whether they're information requirements or properties, parameters, a handoff between some other person. And we then need to be able to drop the 3D model in and see that those requirements have been met. Especially important is being able to review that work before you then share it, before you publish it for everyone else to use. Because otherwise, if you're publishing models for other people to use, when you haven't checked it against the requirements, it can be really painful and a lot of extra work for other people down the road. So let's take a look at how we might do that. So let's move to the verify module. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a model that I'm going to just drag and drop a structural model into our 3D window so that can start processing. And then on the left-hand side, I've got our tasks that have now been filtered. They were filtered for me. Let's clear that filter so we can see all of the tasks. But what we want to do is filter only for the tasks that are by the structural team, because that's the model that we're reviewing. And we want to filter by just the ones that are ready for review. So we say just the ones that are ready for review and just the ones by the structural team. And now I have those tasks that are ready. I can open this task. I can see that actually there's 23 days left, but they have checked it off. So they're early by 23 days, which is fantastic. And we can also review the set of requirements. In our very quick demo, we only added one requirement that they have checked off already. And we can then start to understand and interrogate that against the 3D model. You can start to see we've got floors, we've got stairs, etc. And we can really understand and interrogate this model and start to make sure that it meets the requirements that we had agreed to. So let me just close the palette on the right-hand side. And for this task, this stairs task, what we're going to do is find a stair and then make sure that we select all of them and have them linked to this task. So now that is always connected from then and on to the future. And there's some machine learning fun there that if you are digging in, you want to become a customer, we'd love to share with you more on that and how that works. But now they're connected, and now we can go through and review those requirements. But before I verify those stairs, what I want to do is make sure that that item in the checklist is actually correct. So check the stairs connect with the floors. Well, the first thing I need to do is show the floors as well. So I'm going to turn the floors on, and then I'm going to look on it from a on the elevation, and then I can go through and make sure that they connect. And actually, I can see that this one does not connect. So we can actually kick that back. We can start to say, this wasn't done, and I'm going to put this into a fixes column. And that would then go back into the workflow. But if let's just say that they were done, and let me verify these stairs, they go away. And then what we can start to see is the status in color coding, what has been done. So now you can see that 3% of the model has been correctly verified, and the rest of the model, 97%, is still yet to be done. And quite cool to be able to find these elements and maybe take those elements out of the building, so we can see that's what's been done. Some cool features here, so you can see the stairs. These are the ones that have been fixed and are done, and this is the rest of the building ready to be verified. So to recap on compliance is you need to gather everything in the same place. We need to be able to review the model against the requirements and connect them. And we need to be able to share and publish that model only when it's gone through the QA process, the quality assurance process. To summarize, we covered a lot in our masterclass here. It was supposed to be a 4-week course, and we packed it into a 40-minute session. So quickly to summarize, in order to improve the BIM management workflow, teams must agree on a plan, something that has the processes and standards that they can use on the project, and everyone follows exactly the same methods. We need to have teams that agree on a visual and clear scope, on a scope that's lean and not bloated, not creating more than's required. And then we need to have a schedule that works in a really efficient way so that it's sequenced for clash avoidance rather than clash detection. And having a task management solution all in the same application, make sure that nothing is missed. And then as we drop the model in, we need to be able to verify against the original requirements before we start using it. So just to summarize in the modules, we have planning for simple BIM execution planning using your templates. We have scoping using, again, a set of templates that you can visually agree to and understand across the teams. And we then schedule those tasks. So each task, each square on the grid becomes a scheduled task, a task on the program that you can then sequence with your teams. And instead of having everyone have a to-do list that is completely disconnected from each other, what we have is teams that manage the same to-do list. It means that you don't have to keep going out to get updates from everyone. And it means that people can focus and they can stop starting and start finishing their work. Really lean approach. And then verifying the model at the end of that workflow that it is compliant with the requirements that you have agreed to in the contract. That end-to-end workflow from plan to scope to schedule to track and to verify is the masterclass. And being able to achieve that in a seamless way will reduce so much waste on your projects and so much time that people would end up spending on unnecessary requirements that were unclear or what they thought might be required and actually weren't required. And it really helps to make it, in the end, a happier BIM team, a happier project and a happier BIM team.